Hello and welcome back to science class. I know the resemblance is uncanny. Look, he's got a white beard. I've got a white beard. I just don't have a cool hat like he does. No, actually, all kidding aside, that is Charles Darwin, and that's who we're going to be looking at and talking about a little bit today because he came up with quite a few amazing theories that have to do with our natural world. So, in your lab book, you want to go ahead and make place for Theories of Charles Darwin and the date, whatever today happens to be. Main ideas or concepts, that's what we're going to be talking about. You're taking some notes and getting some information down. Don't forget, as you do this, you want to be highlighting your vocabulary words. You don't need to write down the whole definition, but maybe a picture or a word that helps you to remember the vocabulary word later on so that when you look at it, you go, oh, that's what it is. So without further ado, we talk a little bit about Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was born on February 12th, 1809, and he died in 1882. So he lived quite a number of good years. He spent 5 years on a ship called the HMS Beagle, and he was the naturalist on that ship. So his job was to look at and observe and record things about nature, things about the animals, about the plants, about the land that was there. In 1859, 20 years after his voyage, he published a book called On the Origin of Species. And you can see right here to my, this way, right there. You can see where his voyage traveled to. So there are two main theories that we're going to look at about Charles Darwin. The first one, as soon as you see this, you're going to go, oh, because some of you say, oh no, that's something I don't believe in. Well, whether you believe in it or not, it's something that we need to learn about in Virginia for our SOLs, our standards of learning. And whether you believe in it or not, I think it's an important concept to understand. So if you think it's correct, then you have some arguments for people who don't. And if you think it's not correct, then hopefully you will know some of the arguments that people have that think it is correct. So evolution is basically changes in inherited features over time. Some people think of evolution in terms of things crawling out of the ocean and eventually evolving into humans. And whether or not that's true, there are some pieces of evidence that make it seem like there is something similar about the living things on the earth. And so I ask you that you listen to this, maybe do a little bit of more research and find out what you think and what you believe in terms of evolution. Is it a fact? No, it's simply a theory. So the first piece of evidence for evolution is something called homologous structures. Homologous structures are structures that are the same in different creatures, even though they're not exactly the same, they're similar. So if you see the example on the top of this page with the different arm bones and finger bones, you'll notice that whether it's a horse or a bat, or whether it's a bird or a human, the bones are the same. Sometimes they're a little longer or a little shorter, but the same bones are there. And so some people would say that that is evidence of evolution. Maybe it's just evidence that all living things were made out of the same stuff. Another evidence of evolution, embryology. There are the embryos of different creatures are very similar to each other. And so as you look at the cells as they begin to develop between humans and fish and birds and reptiles, they start off very similar. But then as they develop, they change. Another one is something called a vestigial structure, body parts that have no function, basically, like your appendix. Some of you may have already lost your appendix. I still have my appendix, if I even have an appendix. And so there are structures that don't seem to really have any necessary thing. Like, for instance, ear muscles. So, why would anyone need to have muscles in their ears? Now, horses need muscles in their ears because they need to be able to brush off flies. They don't have hands or other ways of moving the flies away from their face. So their ear muscles are the things that do that for them. So again, evidence, or is it just because things were made out of similar pieces. Another evidence of evolution that some scientists will point to is something called the fossil record, and being able to look back and see all the fossils and how things changed from one thing into another over time. Again, is it evidence, or is it simply just the way it is because things have been there over time and have died, and as their skulls and bones and hard parts have been left, we're able to kind of see what was there. So that's a little bit about evolution. Now we move into another topic that goes along with Charles Darwin called diversity or biodiversity. Biodiversity is the wide range of living things that inhabit our planet. So, from the beetle and mosquito all the way up to the elephant and the blue whale and all of the things in between. So depending on things like temperature and rainfall, different things live in different places. And places that have more biodiversity are usually places that have more rainfall and higher temperatures, like the jungle and the rainforest. You can find hundreds of different species of animals in a very small area of the rainforest. If you go to the desert, you might only find one or two species of animal in that same space that you found 100 or so in the rainforest. So Charles Darwin's second theory is based on something called natural selection, or the survival of the fittest. I hope that you've heard of the survival of the fittest before, or natural selection. Natural selection has basically 4 conditions that cause it to happen. The first one is something called overproduction. Too many living things for the area where they're living. And so some of them die. Now, why they die is determined by adaptations, and we'll get to that. So the second thing that happens is because there's too many things, there's not enough resources. There's not enough food, there's not enough water, there's just not enough space for everything to live. So again, some of them have to die. So different organisms in a species produce different traits. And as they get those traits, and as those traits are helpful to the species, those traits are passed down to the next generations. And the ones that are more helpful are the ones that get passed along more. And so those are the organisms that are able to survive better than the other ones. And so for some, it's being strong and big and fast. And for some, it might be being small or quiet or able to blend in. So different variations and different adaptations help with different situations. So survival of the fittest doesn't just mean you're the biggest and the strongest. It means you're the best able to adapt to live in that particular environment. So as I said then, that variation, there are advantages of the variations, and the survival of the fittest, the ones that have the better adaptations, make the stronger creatures then to move on for future generations and continuation of the species. So there's the word variation, an individual trait making an individual different from the others in its species. For instance, see my brown eyes? That makes me different from other people because some people have brown eyes and some people have blue eyes. I can roll my tongue. So some people can roll their tongue and some people can't. So those are different variations that I have. An adaptation then is a structure or a characteristic or a behavior that allows an organism to be better suited to its environment. So I have a thumb that allows me to be better suited to my environment because I can grab and I can pick up things. I have teeth, and those allow me to chew my food so I can eat things, and so my body can more easily digest things. All creatures have adaptations. And as we've been watching some Planet Earth and doing some of our ecology study, you've seen some of the adaptations that things have for living in the mountains or in freshwater or in the deserts. Those are some examples that we've seen. Here are some examples of some different adaptations that things have. Plants have them, animals have them, fungus have them. All living things have some sort of adaptation that helps them to survive. Venus flytraps have the hairs inside that when the fly triggers the hair, it closes and it captures it. So if things don't adapt, things change enough, then creatures become extinct. And before extinction, of course, there's endangered and threatened. There's lots of other words that are used. But extinction means it no longer exists on the earth. And at some point, when habitat is no longer there, or when a food source is no longer there, things become extinct. And so basically that happens when something is not able, or for some reason or another doesn't adapt, or sometimes it happens because of other factors like human interference, too many humans on the earth, or a catastrophic event, maybe a meteorite, maybe an earthquake, maybe a volcanic eruption in a place where this particular species lives. And so extinction is kind of then what happens if natural selection doesn't work because of one reason or another. So, if you survived long enough to get through the slide deck, you can now go ahead and write yourself a little quiz, 3 to 5 questions that you have that you could ask about this topic that you think are important about the theories of Charles Darwin. And after that, if you understood everything I talked about and you read about, then you can write, I understood everything today. And if you don't understand everything, then please list here what it is that you don't understand. And maybe ask me so that you can survive and get a good grade, because survival of the fittest